Greetings, this is a reading of the book The Airship Golden Hind. Some of the language in this book has not aged well and is indeed no longer politically correct. Take caution when listening to this visual audio book. Footage and photography are provided by Photations. At Photations, we believe that the world would be a better place if people spent their time being creative, joining us in practicing art so we all can be the master of art. Find art prints available at our store www.photationsstore.com. Keep our artwork alive by making a donation at photationsdonations.com. The Airship Golden Hind by Percy F. Westerman. Chapter 8, Cast Adrift. Enrico Yours, Spaniard on his father's side and German on his mother's, with a dash of almost every other continental nation's blood in his veins, lived or rather existed in a mean dwelling behind the King's Bastion on the west side of Gibraltar. Indolent, thriftless, and easy-going on the one hand, crafty and quarrelsome on the other, he possessed all the bad points that characterize the criminal classes of the two countries where his parents first saw the light. What he did for a living and how he earned money was a mystery even to his polyglot neighbors, yet without being well off, he appeared to be always flush with money. Contrary to the general demeanor of the rock scorps, Enrico Yours expressed no astonishment when the Golden Hind appeared over the high ground beyond Alcatraz. He was expecting the airship, although he had to confess to himself that she had certainly arrived prematurely. Evidently, this was not according to plan. He sat, smoked innumerable cigarettes, and thought as deeply as a half-breed Spaniard can. Twice he got up, yawned, stretched himself, and ambled back to the house to partake of a meal consisting principally of olives, garlic, and maize. Then back he came to his post of vantage and sat gazing stolidly at the 500 feet of inflated gasbook riding easily to her wire cable, while her crew, bringing the airship close to the surface, were busily engaged in pumping up petrol from a tank lighter. The shadows were lengthening considerably when a white-robed Moor approached the reclining Yours, a dignified, olive-featured man wearing a thick black beard and mustache. The Englishman has started, observed the newcomer, speaking in Spanish with a decidedly guttural accent. That I know, rejoined Enrico. But not so von Zensig, continued the other in a low tone, giving a furtive glance over his shoulder. Until he arrives at Mazo, it is doubtful whether he will know that this English airship is on his heels. Why is she here so soon? I know not, replied Yours. 2 men landed from her. They went in the direction of Bruna Vista. The pseudo-Moor shrugged his shoulders. 2,500 pesetas are awaiting you in the Banco del Espiritu at Alcatraz, friend Enrico, he said in a low voice. Prevent that airship's departure even for 12 hours, and the money will be paid you. How can I? Asked Yours, showing more interest than he had hitherto displayed. I cannot place a palm on board her, like I did on board the Henry Artois at Barcelona. Sish not so loud, exclaimed the other warningly. How you earn the money is your affair. The supposed Moor passed on, leaving Enrico Yours gazing thoughtfully at the British airship. He sat and pondered until the refueling operations were completed and the Golden Hind allowed to rise 100 feet above the sea. With the setting of the sun, a gentle breeze sprang up from the nurse's. causing the hitherto almost motionless airship to sway as she fretted at her cable. He waited until darkness had settled upon the scene, then once more made his way into the house. This time he did not eat, but fortified himself with a long drink out of an earthenware bottle. Drawing his knife, he carefully oiled the blade and replaced in its sheath. Then, having selected a marline spike from a tool box, he slung the implement from his neck by means of a lanyard, hiding it under his colored shirt. These preparations completed, he walked slowly and unconcernedly to the old mole. By this time, the waterfront was almost deserted. A patrol marched stolidly down the street. Enrico stepped into the shelter of a narrow courtyard until the khaki-clad party had disappeared. But before he could resume, he had to await the passing of a gaitered and belted naval biscuit. The coast cleared. He reached the mole, a tramp steamer, and a few villages were moored alongside. Farther out, a tug was engaged in shepherding a couple of large lighters alongside an eastbound liner, while changing red, white, and green lights betokened the presence of swift moving steamboats. In the bay, standing out against the faint starlight, he could discern the Golden Hind. Even as he looked, a gleam of light shot through the windows of one of the compartments, and then another, both being almost instantly screened. 2,500 pesetas, whispered yours to himself, a good price for a little swim. Without troubling to remove any of his clothes, although he kicked off his canvas shoes, Enrico cautiously descended a flight of steps until his feet touched the water. Listening to assure himself that no one was about, he glided in as noiselessly as an eel and swam with slow, steady strokes under the counter of the tramp and close to her wall sides until he gained her bows. Taking his bearings of the airship's mooring buoy, he resumed his easy progress cautiously lest values of phosphorescent spray should betray his presence. A quarter of an hour's swim brought him up to the mooring buoy with considerable difficulty, for the large, barrel-shaped buoy was coated with barnacles and slippery with seaweed. Enrico contrived to draw himself clear of the water. Again he waited, listening to the sounds emanating from the airship 100 or 150 feet overhead. The wire hawser, acting as a conductor, enabled him to hear with great distinctness, and possessing a good knowledge of English, he was able to pick up scraps of conversation between the crew that helped him but little, for they were talking of matters as remote from the topic of the Greek race as the poles. Enrico Yours next devoted his attention to the shackle that secured the thimble splice in the end of the cable to the big ring bolt of the buoy. He grunted with satisfaction when he discovered that the shackle was threaded and not secured by a forelock, but at the same time he found by the sense of touch that whoever had been responsible for the job had done his work well by securing the pin by means of a piece of flexible wire. This latter Yours managed to cast loose. Then, with the aid of his marline spike, he began to unfasten the shackle pin, pausing occasionally as the strain on the wire rope increased. At last the deed was accomplished. The shackle pin clattered upon the rounded surface of the buoy and rebounded into the water, but almost simultaneously Enrico Yours found himself being whisked aloft. A snap hook at the end of a wire had caught in his belt, and there he was, suspended ignominiously like a horse being slung on board a ship already 100 feet or more above the surface of the sea. His first impulse was to cut loose his belt and drop, but a downward glance at the dark, unfathomable void made him abruptly change his mind. His sole thought was now that of self-preservation, fearful lest his leather belt should break and send him hurtling through space. He clung desperately to the wire. Sex below him, the lights of Gibraltar seemed to be gliding past as the freed airship drifted towards the strait separating Europe from the African shore. It was bitterly cold aloft. The keenness of the rarefied air was intensified by the fact that his clothes were saturated with salt water. A numbing pain crept down both arms. His muscles seemed to be cracking under the strain, while his fingers closed round the wire until the nails sunk deep into his palms. He shouted for help, his voice sounding more like the yelp of a jackal than that of a human being, but no response came from the airship 100 feet above him. Dios! He exclaimed in agony, this is indeed the end.